It's fine.
Pause, just pause it.
I went to the afternoon. I put my phone at home.
Good idea. They were saying that the children are on the phone too much, their IQ is going down.
Of course, because they don't talk to anybody, they've got no vocabulary.
Okay, shall we start?
Yeah,
Everybody ready?
yeah,
So if you have your book with you,
yes.
we're starting on page 140. Lesson 9.
Well,
This time, as I was preparing the lesson, instead of losing the points I wanted to say, I made lines and stars and whatever. So hopefully I'll remember the parts that I found interesting to pass on. Okay, so today we're learning about kosher, the ins and outs of keeping a kosher home in the modern world. Which is really interesting because so I will share a link on the WhatsApp group with a video that was in her notes. But one thing that I know Sally's asked before, you know, about food, some foods are so simple, why do we make it so complicated, basically, right? Why is kosher so complicated? So it's interesting, I never quite thought about it, I guess, although I know the answer as a separate entity, I never thought about it as an answer to that question. Back in the good old days, cooking was much simpler. We didn't ship things around the world, so they didn't have to last as long. You either made it yourself or you made it and sold it to your little shtetl, and that was it. It didn't go much further than that.
no pre-processed food.
No pre-processed foods. And now, not only are things shipped around the world, so they have to last longer, but because things are made in factories, you'd think that that would make it much simpler because you know exactly what goes into it, what comes out of it, but it actually complicates things because they do a lot more in one factory. There's cross-contamination of different foods and a lot of, I don't know what it's called, items, things, chemicals, flavorings that they're, I don't. But, I'm okay for the moment, thank you. Yes, all the additives that they put into things, some are to extend their life, some are to enhance flavor, some are to help them with the process, simply to help with the process of the manufacturing. So if you were doing it on a much smaller scale without the big machinery, it would you wouldn't need those items. So for example, maple syrup. Well, no, but maple syrup, right? Maple syrup, if you just get it straight out of the tree, then it's fine. Once they put it through a machine, it bubbles up. So to stop the bubbles, they grease the machines so that it doesn't bubble up. So that's the question. But it's such a minimal amount that they don't have to put it on any of the labels. But for from a kosher perspective, it's a problem. So it's a lot more complicated because we have machines to help us with large quantity stuff. So as much as kosher has become easier because you can pick up a bottle or jar or can or whatever, and in America it has a kosher symbol. Here you can look on the app or in the guide, or there's a lot more kosher symbols around. is actually become a lot more complex, which is why we need all the kosher supervision to the extent that we do. So I answered the question before we got to it, but it explained some of that in the video, which is why I wanted to cover that. Anyway, kosher. So to start off, kosher, most of you will know about. It's definitely one of the most well-known mitzvahs. People will often keep some level of kosher, even if it's just at home. It's something that's always kept us apart from others, even if it's just that you can't go out and eat anywhere with anyone because it's not always kosher, which makes it she puts it, a hallmark of Jewish identity, and emphasizes that it's a Jewish way of life and not just a religion. It's part of the way we live. It's also, I think, a lot of what she says here refers a lot more to American culture. As I go through, you'll probably understand why I say that. She put, it's one of the most misunderstood mitzvahs, because while some people understand the idea of keeping kosher, people don't know its details or the significance. Kosher is not a style of food. It's not just the smoked salmon and the potato pancakes and matzo ball soup, but Chinese, Italian, Mexican can also be kosher. Obviously not in your regular Chinese, Italian, Mexican, but you can make kosher
Cultured foods.
yes, thank you. Kosher is not food that's blessed by a rabbi. It's supervised to make sure that all of the ingredients that are in it are kosher themselves. And we don't eat kosher because it's healthy. Because if you think about the foods,
A lot of it is.
yeah, if you think about the foods Jewish people eat, it's not particularly healthy. And some people think, again, I think this relates more to Americans, but some people say that, well, we're so health conscious now, we don't need to keep kosher because we were only keeping kosher because it was more healthy. But obviously that's not why we keep kosher, and it's still relevant. It's not saying that, the way she puts it is, it's not, we don't keep kosher for our physical health, but it's for our spiritual health. It's, if you will, as she puts it, a diet plan for the soul. Although there may be some benefits of keeping kosher, as she puts, soaking and salting meat, checking that the animals weren't unhealthy, but it's not for our physical health that we keep kosher, but our spiritual health. As she says, today it's not that difficult to keep kosher, sometimes challenging, yes, but not too difficult, but we do need to be dedicated to it. So the same way someone would have any other diet or allergies, whether it's gluten-free or vegan or low sugar or lactose intolerant, and you're very conscious of what foods you buy and what goes into it. That's the same way, the same attitude I would say we have towards kashrus, about being careful what we eat and what we bring into our homes.
Is
Okay.
kosher food in Israel, in America, a lot more expensive than regular shop food?
So you've got in America, a lot of your regular foods are kosher.
Right.
So you'll have, you have, if you go to America, there's hundreds and hundreds of kosher symbols. So you have to know which ones are good
Okay.
or not, because there are a lot of kosher symbols that are not reliable. Because any rabbi in America, any rabbi can
Oh.
put a label on it and not know what they're doing. It's very challenging. There are a few main kosher symbols which are fantastic and fine and found worldwide. So your regular basic ingredients in the store, they won't be more expensive because they're kosher. However, if there's not a regular basic ingredient that is kosher and you have to get a kosher brand,
Meat is more expensive.
then probably you have to get a kosher brand,
Right,
then it will be
depends.
more expensive.
So meat is always going to be more expensive than.
So when we get to the meat section,
Supervise, I don't have to pay somebody like we do here to supervise it, that was what the price was start.
so you do, they still have to pay someone to supervise,
Volume is so much more,
right? The difference is that when you're doing, you know,
hundreds of thousands.
that much more, it's spread across so many more items, whereas here it's a much smaller scale. So we feel it more, basically. When we get to the meat, though, we can talk about why kosher meat is more expensive.
We're going to use half of it.
That's part of the reason.
And then the cost of chefing and
That's part of it.
supervision.
So, but we're not up to that yet.
And some butchers are more with their profit than others.
That's a different story. Besides that. So the fundamentals of keeping kosher boil down to three basic ideas. The specific foods that are permitted or forbidden and how they need to be prepared, separation of meat and milk, the ability of mankind to transform physical food into a vehicle for holiness. So even when we are eating kosher food, we still have the ability, we shouldn't just eat for the sake of eating, we still have the ability to use that food for a higher purpose, whether that's eating so that we have the energy to do more, to do more mitzvahs, or eating on Shabbos because that's a mitzvah, or even just because we're looking after our bodies and that's a reason to eat, then all of those reasons elevate the food that we are eating. Okay, if we look at text number 1, would somebody like to read? Henry?
There are 3 types of mitzvah. One which comes in laws governing the civil and moral fabric of life. They are logical, readily understood, and widely appreciated as pivotal to the foundation and maintenance of a healthy society. These include warnings against theft, murder, promiscuity. Okay?
Yeah, go on.
Eight, rituals and rites best described as testimonials. This category includes the many religious acts that remind Jews of historic moments in history and serve as testaments to cardinal beliefs of the Jewish faith. These include celebrating Passover, observing Shabbat, and fixing mezuzah on their doorposts. In cooking, super-rational commands, divine decrees about which the human mind can form no judgment. Cooking completely define human intellect and understanding. One observes its mitzvot simply because of divine instruction. These include ritual purity, impurity, chutness, wearing garment, woolen linen, and kosher. Sometimes observance of food question commandments more challenging, as their moral or symbolic meanings are not outwardly evident. However, when dealing with the Torah, which is divine instruction, the real surprise should be that the human mind is able to comprehend anything, not amazement when it cannot. After all, one is dealing with the word and wisdom of God. God becomes extremely limited, his wisdom does not exceed human understanding.
So we have 3 different areas of mitzvahs, those that make sense, that we understand, don't steal, don't murder. Edis, those that are symbolic, basically, that remind us of things that happened in the past, or why we do they have a meaning, and chukim that don't make any sense. And we just keep them because the Torah tells us to. That's the only reason. And by doing so, we can connect to God on a much, much deeper level, because we're not doing it because we understand it. We're not doing it because it makes sense to us. We're not doing it because it's a sensible thing necessarily to do. We're doing it purely because God told us to. Purely because Hashem said, this is a mitzvah I want you to keep. Now, interestingly, she writes, there are less than 10 categories out of the 613 mitzvahs that are chukim. So,
The big ones, passwords.
yes, clearly they are big ones. Yeah, and kosher, whilst there are lots of beautiful explanations about why we might eat this or not eat this, or why we might do this or not do that. The reason we do it, we don't really fully understand. We do it because Hashem told us to, purely because we were told to keep this mitzvah. Text
Like
number
a kid
2.
saying to its mother, but why, mummy? Because I said so.
Yes.
It doesn't hurt to learn with advanced knowledge that a lot of the rules are in fact healthier as well. For example, pork and shellfish is still the two most easiest foods, even with modern food regulation, get food poisoning.
So yes, that's what I'm saying, but that's not why we do
No,
it.
and so it doesn't hurt to know that there is a solid reason behind it as well.
A lot of it is,
The fact that it's because the blood of and you don't eat certain parts where certain veins are. They were the parts that carried BSC. Mad counting.
yeah.
But when that rule was made, did you know about the BSC?
No, that when you eat it, and that's
It's like during the plague, they blame the Jews because they didn't get sick. Why didn't they get sick? Because we washed more often. Because we wash regularly before we eat. No answer, because there's so many times where we wash and keep clean that
Before we realised why we were doing it, nobody realised, didn't they? In the
Yeah.
medieval times.
so. Well, often weren't allowed to, but yeah. He said often because we weren't allowed to, but yeah.
Because you wouldn't have had the facilities available. I mean, where I live, I have to walk or quite a way to go to a shul. Where in the street or it's just down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Text number 2, would somebody like to read? Page 141.
Jewish mystical teaching explains that the progress of eating is much more than the simple physical act of satisfying our hunger. The word we eat ultimately impacts our very essence. Judaism teaches that the food we eat not only affects our body, it influences our soul. Modern science recognizes that food is absorbed into the very flesh and blood of our bodies, and that we become what we eat. The kosher dietary laws direct and guide this connection of the body and soul that we both are strong and healthy. The Talmud teaches that every human activity represents the opportunity for spiritual refinement, because as Jews, we have a godly given ability to infuse the physical with holiness and completely transformable in the process. For example, if you donate money that you earn to a worthy cause, the act of charity takes a mundane activity of work and elevates it to a much higher level. Spirituality, everything that went into it. That what is true regarding our daily activities is also true of the food we eat. Jewish tradition teaches that the forbidden foods referred to in the Torah contain spiritually essence that adversely affect the Jewish soul and none with spiritually sensitivity. Thus, eating these foods weakens one.
So we are what we eat. I had cheese for supper. We are what we eat, so physically, the food is absorbed into our body. Spiritually, if we eat the correct foods, if you will, according to the kashrus laws, then it connects to our soul and it helps us be more spiritual, and it feeds that part of our bodies, our spiritual part of our bodies. And by doing that, the same way that it says that if you take some of your money and you give it to tzedakah, it elevates all of the work that you did to make that money. The same way with kosher food, if you use that energy from eating, then the food that you ate is also elevated. Just want to check I didn't miss anything.
I had a little mantra that I sort of often say to a couple of people, I said it to people. The family that eats together stays together.
They say about family that prays together, so.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I'm saying that's my cognitive. Yeah. Sometimes, not always, but there's always exceptions in the rule.
Sam had this game when he was younger that was, it was to do with food and it was, we are what we eat from our head to our feet. But it was interesting that it included that.
So the bottom paragraph of the second text, Jewish tradition teaches that the forbidden foods referred to in the Torah contain spiritual essences that adversely affect the Jewish soul and numb its spiritual sensitivity. She does have a long explanation here, basically saying that our body, we spoke about this right at the beginning of this course, that our body is a very physical, we have the nefesh habahamis, the animal part of our soul, and the spiritual part of our soul, the nefesh elokis, which is more connected to godliness. And our physical body will often, or sometimes, crave something that might physically appeal to us, but spiritually isn't the best thing for us. So if we, I don't know, walk past the kebab shop on the high roads, and you know, oh, that really smells good, that really, and one day, so you know, just stop in and have a kebab. Not that the shop looks appetizing to me at all, but anyway, that what it says is it numbs our spiritual sensitivity because we're feeding our animal soul as opposed to feeding our spiritual soul. So we're saying that with food we can feed our soul in a spiritual way. If we eat kosher food, you can take it further than that. If you make a bracha on the food, and if you bench after the food, thanking Hashem for the food. But right now we're talking about kashrus. So if we eat kosher food, whether we're at home or whether we're not at home, even if it's challenging, especially if it's challenging, which it sometimes can be, then we're strengthening our spiritual soul as opposed to strengthening our animal soul and our physicality. That's the right word I'm looking for in that sentence. Not sure. I don't know. The brain's still a bit fuzzy. So, and we use obviously the Torah as a guidebook, not just for kashrus, but for the world and everything we do. And kashrus is the way that it tells us that we can, the word she used here, which I do not think is a word, especially because it's in quotes, spiritualize the world. But forbidden foods, whether it's the actual foods like shellfish, and there was something else you mentioned. Thank you. I couldn't even remember how long ago you said it, 3 minutes. Cannot be elevated, cannot be spiritualized, because they are completely forbidden. There's no way to do that. And if you learn Tanya, anyone who comes to the Tanya class Shabbos morning, we constantly have, we're learning it now in the form of kashrus, but we constantly have a body and soul struggle, that our body, our nefesh habahamis, wants the very physical pleasures of this world, and our spiritual soul wants the our soul wants the spiritual pleasures, I guess, in a different sense, of this world. And that's a constant struggle for everyone except the tzaddik, which I know I'm definitely not on the level. So where do we get them from? The kosher laws were commanded by Hashem when we got the Torah at Har Sinai. Moshe taught them to the people and wrote down the basic laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, which I can't think what those are in Hebrew at the moment, so just have to go with that. Is that Vayikra and Devarim? Is that possible? I don't know. We'll go with the English for now, because yeah, and Leviticus. Is that Vayikra? That's what I thought. And then through the years, the details were handed down until eventually they were written down in the Mishnah and the Talmud. As I think we discussed before, that's where we get the oral Torah from. So it was passed down from generation to generation until eventually people were forgetting or getting mixed up and things were written down. And then through the years, there were some rabbinical authorities added safeguards for the biblical laws. So sometimes people could ask, why would an infinite God want or need such a detailed nitty-gritty service from us? Sound like a good question?
Been asking it a long time.
Why?
Come up with an answer.
Isn't he above all of that? So the answer she's got here, let's see if it satisfies you, or at least for the moment, is precisely that. Judaism is not the only religion that provides the means to sanctify one's entire life experiences, from the most mundane to the most profound. This is not just in the shul or on special occasions, but in all places at all times. Hashem is found everywhere, and we have the opportunity to connect with him always. So it's not just one aspect. It's not just when we dive into Hashem. It's not just when we're doing a particular mitzvah, but Hashem is everywhere at all times. So throughout our day, our lives, our week, whatever you want to say, we have the ability to connect to Hashem that is around us all of the time, through everything that we do, through all of the nitty-gritty little details of our daily lives. Does that help at all?
I was just wondering, I wonder if before all these things got available easily,
Which things?
being able to go and buy your bread because it's got FKA or whatever, when you had to be more thoughtful about how you lived your life, because they were not on the shelf in Sainsbury's or around the corner or wherever, but maybe that was more meaningful, whereas now things are so easily accessible in some areas, not others, that people are less knowledgeable and caring about the concepts that you've just spoken about.
You've still got to check. Like the bread or.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that if you go shopping and you go and buy food that you know is okay.
Yeah.
That is less effort and therefore it's automatic and does the thought process go in the same way that it would have done 30 years ago when we didn't have to.
Yeah, let me read it. But if you couldn't get it that easily, well, you might not bother to get it at all, unless you were really.
Well, then you would.
But I think what Sally's saying is there's a thought process.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't have to think about it,
You just go and pick it up.
you don't have to think about it. That's not a very, that's not a very.
So,
Oh.
like this generation, the generation that is below me, they can go to any relatively most supermarkets in an ordinary area, not a Boreham Wood, but in a Woodford or a Gants Hill or even Leytonstone or Chingford, and you can go in and you can pick up your King's Mill and it's there for you, or you can pick up your jar of honey and you may or may not know that you need to have whichever one it is, or those things are much easier. And it used to be when I was a child that brown eggs were very special, but white eggs were the norm. Whereas now we go searching for white eggs.
Always has them.
Well, yeah, but you have to go, we have to go 4 miles to the butcher.
So
So all I'm saying,
Always get it loose the white eggs if you want. But you still have to be careful because at any time the cashier could change.
yes,
And things that might not do. They might change their recipe or something. So I think you still has to be a thought person.
but I think people know that the thought process is necessary because there's so much on the plate.
So putting it into a much simpler form, what you're saying, but in a much simpler form. My kids know that when they go shopping, we don't have just any chocolates, we only have cholesterol. So it's much harder to find sweets or chocolates or treats or whatever. So they know when they go, whenever anyone says, you know, going to Sainsbury's, oh, can you get me a chocolate? Because they have a kosher section that has chocolates we'll eat, right? If they go to Sainsbury's with you, they know exactly where it is. Don't know how, because I never go into a store, but anyway, they know exactly where it is. They know you can get chocolates. It's only like 2 options. Whereas my kids, oh gosh, have you seen the kosher stores? Oh my goodness, there's like more sweets than there is food. Anyway,
On the KLBD app, that's what it is, it's far more sweets and.
I was
smash
really
put a lemon.
if you go into
Like the ice creams.
but my kids' friends, most noticeably with Ethel, because she now goes to the stores with her friends on her own. Her in Stamford Hill, they don't think about it. They walk into the store and oh, what would I like today? You know, they don't even have to think about it. They don't have to, is it kosher? Where am I going to get it? What can I get? What can I not get? Yes, but that's because of where they are. So it's the same concept of if it's readily available, you don't necessarily think about it. And I would venture to say most people don't think about the spiritual reason of why we're eating kosher.
I don't understand spirituality at all.
I mean, just so.
Your soul does, Sally.
Also, you do still have to be careful, even if you go to the kosher aisle for sweets or whatever in Sainsbury's, because I picked up once a whole pack of Mentos, which I buy at the kosher shop usually, and mint Mentos, and I didn't think we did mint kosher mint ones, Sainsbury's, and I looked at them, because I know, but I looked at them, and there was a pack of non-kosher ones, so somebody else had got the
kosher ones have got the Hebrew writing.
Yes, I know, but
You don't necessarily.
I knew exactly. I knew what to look for, and I was surprised that So I did tell a member of staff, I don't know whether I sort of talking about.
I don't think they have a clue.
That Philadelphia, if you can read the code on the Philadelphia cheese.
My friend was telling me all about it,
If you can have Philadelphia cheese, if it's got, I think it's ND, is it?
Well, I
Well, I
don't know,
can't.
it was like an hour, I've got it on my phone, because my friend sent it to me.
Yes, have you sent it to me? And I'm actually with my other friend.
So what's your question?
Oh,
Well,
well, I got something else to show.
what I'm saying is that these things are there, but as Pam says, you've got to know which is the code to look for. Like Mrs. Biscuits have got to have the H in front of the code of the number.
So.
And that's not okay for everybody.
It's like the oil at Payson, it had a certain number before that was posted. But it was
And
on
then
the shelf.
SKA come in and change it.
So often it's down to the factories, that kind of thing. The batch code tells you where it was made, which is what, it's not what makes it kosher or not, but often there's something in effect.
Yeah.
In effect, all the ingredients might be kosher, because I'm sure Philadelphia formula is the same in each factory, but
That's what's
it's
done with the
depending
machine.
which, right, it's depends what else is done on the machines that will make it a problem. Right, so it's the batch number will give you usually which factory it's from. It's challenging because people don't necessarily know, correct? But do you know what? Having kosher and non-kosher Haribo is also challenging. Do you know how often people will go, oh, I know Haribo is kosher, so they bought it for us as gifts, right?
Yeah, I know that's, I've seen some just that.
Haribo, the Haribo sweets,
Yes,
right?
So if they're vegan, version, why they have to call it the same thing?
It looks exactly the same. Not only call it the same thing, the
Yes.
bags are the same, everything.
We're stupid.
Yes. So, but the problem is it's their branding.
Vegan as well.
So it's, yes, it's extremely challenging for the kosher consumer, or I want to say the want to be kosher consumer, those who try to keep kosher but aren't as vigilant about it. So they, I don't want to say they don't necessarily care, but they're not as strict about it. I think that's the group of people that it's most challenging for, because for those who know and know to look, okay, so it might be a bit inconvenient, you have to look. For those who know Haribo is kosher or Philadelphia is kosher, or but don't know the details of what makes it kosher, will think, oh well, all Haribo is kosher, all Philadelphia is kosher, and it's very misleading. Yes.
Doesn't help when
But-
Asian restaurants suddenly come on companies, and you can have fake on.
Bacon.
Oh,
I, someone said, well, does it taste like bacon?
it's a big thing in America.
I wouldn't even have something that's
No.
called that.
Yeah.
It's a big thing in America.
There was like this way past. See that one, but like Julie, my husband would like it because he's always looking for something new. It's like. In Israel, they have the way around it. Turkey, that new forest, the same
But there was not
with
many
your eggs.
Still carried the most vegetables with my nice little Indian birds from the pool, because you knew when it was paid that the perfect, when you went to bought boxes and boxes. Lovely now. But I eat very little processed food these days because I just can't be bothered. It's much easier to just make it from scratch.
That's what that program was on last week about pre-processed food and the.
Yes, I saw them.
And I actually sat there and thought, well, I've done, we don't have, but I mean, except for things like cheese. which of course is
But we used to have the sliced meat in the packs.
I know.
Yeah, for years, I mean, sliced turkey and all of that.
No.
I mean, that's we don't see it in big shops now.
Well, so I'll be
We
able
all do it.
Sausages and, yeah, probably the word.
Yeah.
Processed food, and I have,
Yeah.
there's sausages already,
Yeah.
typically.
So we have processed foods as backup. things, like ready-made meals. Otherwise, I cook generally.
You know, if it's not made.
Or more than even, so that I can put it in little plastic containers and put it in the freezer, you know, rather than, I don't eat enough processed food. A, the problem with getting making sure it's kosher, but B, even when it's kosher, somebody numbered, you know, I don't want
Oh,
to lose the numbers.
Kosher's not necessarily healthy, we said that.
Well, fruits and vegetables and tin tuna and sardines, okay? All tin sardines,
Huh?
in the supermarket.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle of summer.
No, I don't buy sardines, so I would have to check, because I have no idea.
It's in a vegetable oil, so the ones, not a salt, not so.
Which may.
But
So-
the answer is just don't. Because what happens
No,
now-
but Brenda's saying if you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, it is good to know what you need, what you can get.
Right, it says you can't eat allergies like all around the world, but fine, so how can we not local? Can we not have local?
So
You don't know which one.
this is what happens when you read ahead, Sally. Let's go. Text number 3.
So maybe you need numbers. No, you don't know which one.
So there is a Masara, a tradition handed down. Certain groups, Sparta mostly, that know which locust it is that's okay. So if you are desperate to eat a locust and to try it, there are a couple of restaurants in Israel who serve it as a delicacy. Can't vouch for how much it's going to cost either.
Whereabouts?
I do not know, but I read an article in Mishpacha magazine about the guy who supplies to the restaurants.
Exceptionally expensive. You must need to eat a lot of burgers to get filled up.
You don't just.
I don't think it's a main course. Yes.
Meat in a processed cake.
Really don't want to know about it because they say
It's
we ought to eat that.
home baked by the bakery.
With the world being overpopulated, and there's going to be a lack of food because of methane created on the climate change and so on. What then will be the halakhic rulings, I wonder, about finding appropriate food?
It will be plants, won't it?
We're going to plants now to run out as well.
What plant?
Right, well then.
So it's like a
die, because there's
Because
nothing
of
to
the
wait,
wet
so
time.
it won't really be a problem for those.
Well, we can't.
It's a lot of rabbit.
So processed, and so much added to them.
Not if we go back to the good old days and grow everything ourselves.
You're going to grow potatoes in your back garden.
I would love to grow something as soon as I have the time.
I would have thought that.
How do you grow quinoa? Oh, the kid Ellie used to grow things, huh? What should I make?
I'll give you my plants in exchange for your tomato. I mean, I think that's a really good idea. Because I know what they answer.
It's a part of them.
My last year.
I dream of growing strawberries.
Oh, I've got lots of things to grow.
Green will go what?
Strawberries.
Oh, strawberries.
Not if you don't have a green
Yeah,
thumb.
they're not for
If you don't have a.
Green thumb. I
It's
can't.
green hand.
I don't have. My hands are not green at all. Usually they're quite colorful, but not green. Blue, pink, brown,
That's the
black,
food
from
coloring.
paint, from food coloring, from.
No, I just got them, yeah, containers, they just come up every year, I can put loads.
I used to grow tomatoes in our office.
This year.
One year my kids planted, we bought a whole bunch of seeds. We made a raised thing to plant it.
You can put netting over.
And we did broccoli, rainbow carrots, so each one was a different color.
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking there was some kind of lettuce or cabbage or something, but I can't remember what. I don't think it actually grew. And something else. No,
Petrol spillage.
The petrol spillage is
Yeah.
your it makes the most of your bit
This
of
was in
ground,
Liverpool,
because
so-
you can keep going back and picking more and picking more, it just keeps growing, and pick more, pick more.
Flowers. With the dispersion.
So as far as I know, flowers, obviously edible flowers that are edible are fine, but you'd have to check them for bugs. I have no idea how. I could find out if you'd like to know, but I have, well, not everything do you wash in salt water.
Or washing.
No. Raspberries,
Sorry,
raspberries.
Yeah.
You need to throw on a warm white surface.
Get the bugs out and the room.
Yes. So if you want them looking nice afterwards, it doesn't really work.
Yeah. Strawberries, slightly warm, that's the drop washing up.
Or salt.
And you can see the bricks coming in.
No, yeah. So shall we, huh?
Stick with our apples.
Although interestingly, I learned back in high school that any fruit that you're not supposed, that you can't eat entirely by itself, like a grape or cherry, that you have to bite into, you should cut into it instead of biting into it. So an apple you should cut into pieces and then eat the pieces. Because what's worse than finding an apple, a worm in your apple? Finding half a worm in your apple.
I had that situation as a child once. I
Oh, no.
didn't eat cauliflower for a very long time afterwards. I had cauliflower on my plate. I cut into it and I ate some, and then I noticed that there was half of where I cut it.
Like a worm, yeah.
I'm not saying they're eggs, just the flowers beginning to set after fertilization. So certainly the plum trees, my first lot of plums that come have to be cut and washed and have all the bits inside removed before you can turn them into anything else.
Okay.
And it's because of the moss, and the same with the apples to a lesser extent. The very first crop that come is the one that seems to have the most bugs in.
It's good to know.
Never had a single bug in our plums when I was a child in the plum tree from the back garden.
never.
I've recently read an article about pigs.
Oh, yeah.
That say that they're actually fertilized by
Yeah, it's like a.
inside by a wasp inside.
Yeah.
Someone told me that
So
once.
how can you
You have to cut
check
them.
that?
Well, figs need checking.
But
They get creepy.
Yeah,
colours.
once it leaves, it not.
I don't know, but I know when I see a bug, then you,
Belgian world, that's what-
although they did say, the article did say that nowadays most of the pigs are not fertilized that way, and they don't have bugs in them anymore, but that is the normal way for.
Yeah, I did. No,
You read it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
shall we read through? I'm just conscious of the time is ticking. Okay, text 3, shall we? Maybe take it in turns, because there's lots on here, lots of different things going forward, so. All right, do you want to, and then we'll go around, yeah?
Where are we?
So kosher, text 3, kosher animals, maybe if you want to read the first 2 or something, I don't know, I'll let you.
Kosher animals, any animal that has a cloven hoof that is completely split into double hooves and which brings up its cud, you may eat. The Torah states that only 4 animals have just one of the kosher signs and are thus not kosher. These include the pig, split hooves, camel, the hare, and the hyrax, which my good
Yes.
friend over here.
We have
has
a
just looked at.
Rabbits do as well.
Okay,
They only chew.
What's the one?
We have, it's like a, it's like a rabbit.
I'm getting that, Myra.
It's like a,
I'm getting a.
it's like a, it's like a rabbit.
You see,
Can't see it.
Snout a bit. Shall I carry on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so kosher animals have split hooves and chew their cud.
Doesn't look very.
There are 4 animals that have one of these features, but not both, so they are not kosher. The reason pig is often brought up as the non-kosher animal and not camel, hare, or hyrax, is because they have split hooves and chew their cud, so it's a lot easier to notice that
Pigs have
thing.
cloven hooves, but they don't chew their cud.
Correct, so it's a lot easier to see, it's an outside, a visible, what's the word I'm looking for, sign?
What happens to the hair as we call it rabbit?
Rabbit,
No,
rabbits-
no, we
rabbits
can't.
chew their
Can't
cud
see
as
them.
well.
These are 4 animals that have one of these aspects, but not both, so they are not.
Yeah,
They are not kosher.
because, hares and rabbits are different, and rabbits chew their cud as well.
But they don't have.
So
They don't
I'm,
have split hooves, no.
so
No, but I mean, there's more, it says 4,
unless,
and it gives you 4, and rabbit is.
But there are-
But rabbits are also.
There are many animals who've got Iris is hydrax is a rabbit.
No, I'm talking about your ordinary common garden bum.
Oh, it's the same.
No, it's not,
Maybe it's-
Hyraxes are actually, more closely related to elephants than they are to rabbits.
Yes, I know. You get the visual, you see them, yeah. Oh, in South Africa, you see them.
Yeah, and in Israel, you can see hyraxes.
Yeah, but then they call them a rabbit.
Yeah, but they're not, they're more nearly,
We can't
related
eat
to
elephants
elephants,
either.
strangely enough.
Certainly not the whole one, lump.
Wow.
so examples of animals that are kosher, I'm sure we know lots or most of them: cows, sheep, goats, deer. Example of yes, giraffes. Animals that are not kosher: pigs, rabbits, squirrels, bears, dogs, cats, camels, and horses.
So there you are, lots more than 4.
Well, it said that
The
the
rabbit
rabbit
society, so they also said if it's not normally eaten food in your general area.
I've never
Yes.
heard this.
Yes.
And then school is now going on the menu in some places.
Okay, not in a
And
kosher
very
house.
important, because like we've got things like, I think ostrich is actually permitted as a bird. But the rabbis have said no, it's not really egg around here, so you can't have it. And some other.
But that's like anything then, anything's not common to Woodford or London or
It's
England.
common to England in the good old days.
Ah.
When the rabbis were around, the rabbis who wrote these things. But the modern ones have said if it's not normally local to your area, you can't take it, which is against what?
Well, you say that, but there's very limited actual rules, if you will, about kashrus in the Torah.
I don't think that's
It's-
definitive.
But
No, it's
we
interesting.
learn a lot based on, so for example, the next one, separation of meat and milk. We learn, well, Pam, do you want to read it? And then I'll explain what I'm saying.
Separation of milk and meat. You shall not cook a young animal in its mother's milk. The sages explain that the repetition of the verse teaches us that it is not only forbidden to cook meat and milk together, but it is also forbidden to then eat or derive benefit from the mixture.
So because it's listed, it's mentioned the same sentence 3 times in the Chumash. They learn from that, the rabbis learn from that you can't cook it, you can't eat it, and you can't get any benefit from it.
What does that mean, benefit?
You can't cook it and sell it to someone else.
Like working in-
Or
like-
And what happens if you work in a non-kosher restaurant?
couldn't.
Well, what happened if you leave the
Based
family?
on
You've got-
that,
you've got to have
you-
a job.
You
No.
couldn't. So,
You have to ask the rabbi.
yeah, if that's the only job available, then ask your LOR.
Well, really, I mean, if you're working in, not if you own the restaurant, if you're working in it, you are not actually selling it to somebody, are you?
No, it's
Because
not your fault.
you are just serving it to them, you're
It's
not
the benefit.
getting
Well,
the.
Unless you absolutely love the
It's a
smell,
wage.
and the reason you're working there is because you get to smell it all day long, then you wouldn't be able to either.
Where does it say, does it say in these laws that came after the Torah, that how long you have to wait before you could have milk after meat?
We'll come up to that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting where that was learned from. So, for example, that was learned not because it's specifically said in the Chumash, this and this and this, but it's learned because we learn from the Mefarshim, from the commentators, that the Torah doesn't have extra words. When it has extra words, there's a reason for it, there's a meaning for it. So the fact that it's listed that it says it 3 times, what can we learn from this? What's the reason for this?
Is this a
Last
draft
night.
or something?
Last night you got it on the roof.
See, I don't get with that. I'm sure it didn't make commentators. He said it, he may have emphasised it by repeating himself. But he didn't need added interpretation.
But
You have to have someone to do your interpreting.
Why? You had Moses, that was the only person. who-
right, and he passed down the knowledge. That's what we said at the beginning.
As it
Right.
was, he didn't.
He stayed up on the mountain for 40 days a night, learning the meanings of everything.
No,
What was he doing?
writing down a lot of Torah.
But it doesn't take, it didn't take him that long to write it down. He wrote 13 Torahs in a day. He wrote 13 Torahs the last day of his life. Maybe. So we learn that he was learning the details of the laws so that he could pass on the information and the knowledge to the next generation.
Well, different on that.
Okay, but that's where we learn. Otherwise, as you said, you'd go back to the Karaites and follow it to the letter of the law. But that's not the general Torah way. There are differences in some areas. And it's really interesting because when I went on the Morocco trip, we learned how the differences came to be. But generally, the same laws are followed and accepted around the world. And yes, they might be difficult to understand, but as we learned right at the beginning, kosher laws are not there for us to understand, just to follow. So
There's sometimes paragraphs in the Torah that we read. You don't quite understand what it means, and you do need somebody higher up to you, more knowledgeable, to interpret it. So that's when the rabbis come to interpret it. Because sometimes we read it.
yeah,
Well, sometimes to me, it's quite clear what something means, and then
But
someone
sometimes
comes,
it's
no,
clear, but
let me
sometimes
finish,
it isn't.
but then someone comes along and they've got a totally different interpretation. That's up to them. I'll go, if I don't need to ask someone, I think I understand it as it is. Like, for example, the animals that you can, it doesn't matter to me whether they come here or they come there. You see, if I myself consider the Torah not just our history, but to guide us through the present day and into the future. And I believe Hashem can see all that, what was happening in the future. Whereas I don't think the medieval commentators were necessarily of that high level.
But they thought exactly the same as you. They thought everybody in their
Well, then maybe
generation
the
thinks they
problem
know.
I don't put my thoughts
In
down
100
because
years'
no one
time,
else understands.
Somebody else will say, how
But
can
they
they know?
were differently educated. They needed some help in following because they couldn't read the Torah, could they?
It's all human. Okay, a lot of the Torah, like, in fact, the Quran is learned by rote.
Yeah.
A lot of in the yeshivas, what they do is learn Talmud by rote.
No,
Then they discuss.
they're definitely not learning it by rote.
Especially, I didn't say it was all of them,
Well, I won't be there.
but I didn't say all of them.
They're definitely not learning by rote. The way that they learn is to question everything. That's what we do. That's what Jewish people do. They question everything.
And that's in a way, that's the proof. The fact that you question everything, and over the period of the last 5,000 years, these things are still, did happen, are still happening, must mean that it's worthwhile, otherwise it wouldn't be there. I'm glad I don't live next door.
We don't have neighbors. We're so lucky.
And look, it's
Anywhere.
They've got a big playground in Woodford.
Yes, yeah, but our religion revolves.
Evolves.
Evolves, yeah.
Shall I read the next?
Yeah, go on. Oh, you picked the shortest one on purpose now.
No, I read two, I don't mind.
I'm teasing you.
Kosher fish, among all that are in water you may eat, any in that water that has fins and scales, Leviticus 11:9. Do you want me to read?
So
that?
kosher fish, we know kosher fish has to have fins and scales.
There doesn't seem to be any prohibition that has to be local to your natural water. That's why I'm saying.
But as I said, I've never heard anyone say that. I've never heard it. I've never seen it written. So you've mentioned that to me, but in all the things that I've ever learned, I've never heard that. So I have no answer for you because I've never heard that. So I don't know what the argument would be to that.
You could only eat what was local.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
about nowadays.
No, forever people would only be bought with.
I think
So if they had deer, because they lived in the Highlands of Scotland and they were Jewish, they would look at its feet, they would open it, check its stomach, and if it regurgitated and it
Tell if it chews its cup. They go all day long.
then they would say, okay, we haven't got many cows here.
Yeah, people in culture not eating deer because
That's right, but they would be eating, they'd be eating a lot of fish. Because they're fishermen. So I think that I think that it does apply that people would eat what was local to them.
About just what you would eat because it's doors on top.
no, they're playing
Kicking a ball against the wall. Kicking a ball against the fence.
Other countries, all over the world.
No.
Well, I'm
Everybody
sorry,
made up their own mind.
It was no, this was a modern rabbi. It was recently,
All right.
last few
When we
years.
look up on the internet. They will have all learned something.
Do you want me to read that?
Thank you.
Kosher birds, and among the birds you shall hold these in abomination, they shall not be eaten. They are an abomination, the eagle, the kite, the osprey, the kestrel, and the vulture after its species, and the raven after its species, the ostrich, the jay, the sparrow hawk, and the goshawk after its species, the owl, the gull, the little owl, the bats, the starling, the magpie, the stork, the heron after its species, the hoopoo, and the attelet.
I don't even know what half these are.
all these that they don't.
There you are, that was
Yeah.
you said about the ostrich.
Excuse me.
It's actually.
Yeah.
Still reading.
I'm not done yet, excuse me. Today, the only species of fowl that have been handed down through reliable Jewish tradition as kosher, such as chicken, turkey, certain geese, and duck.
Yeah.
We know also from the Torah pigeon are kosher because there were sacrifices. They used to have pigeon.
And
Wales must be as well.
that dance will be the same.
Yes, sounds possible.
Wales.
I believe so, yeah. So I find it interesting though that she listed Turkey because some groups of people don't have turkey because they have a Masorah, a tradition passed down in their families, that turkey was not included in the list of kosher birds.
Because it was from America and didn't come from the rest of the world? We didn't
I
know
don't-
about Turkey.
I don't know, maybe, it sounds very, there was
hundreds
a
of
lot
years.
of the Sephardi
Yeah.
families won't
Yeah,
necessarily
won't
have
because they never
turkey
knew what it
because
was.
they don't have that tradition that it was one of the kosher birds.
The right
No,
daily growth.
nobody had the tradition of turkey until it came from, unless there are any Jewish Native Americans. But well, I
Anything's
mean,
possible.
before Columbus got there. But because, I mean, nobody here, nobody knew about it. So until they got here, there was no tradition of eating turkey.
So I'm not sure where the tradition actually comes from, that they are kosher, but I do know that there are some people who do not eat turkey because they hold that it's
They're
not
stuck with that
kosher.
tradition.
And that's a red.
That's blaming Christmas
Christmas
dinner.
Yes, actually, I thought you were going to say that because of some Jewish people don't eat salad. Christmas dinner.
And if you come, it would say, but then again, if you come to my house, you're never gonna get turkey, because I think it's too dry, so I don't cook it at all.
Yeah. No, that's.
Yeah, Lydia, do you want to read the last one? Go on.
I've been requested to finish.
Go on.
By Sally.
Yeah.
A torn mortally ill animal, you shall be holy people to me. Flesh torn in the field, you shall eat.
So you're not supposed to just tear a piece off a live animal and eat it.
I thought it meant if an animal has half eaten something and has left it in the field.
You're not supposed to do that either,
No, I
for different
know, that's
reasons,
why
but yeah.
torn flesh in the field.
So is this also to do with checking that they are blood? Is that the same?
So that's a stricter,
That's the next level up?
kind of,
Okay,
yes,
fine.
this is the basic bottom line, actual from the Torah. Basic halacha, not allowed to have, hold on, this is
Something that's been killed by somebody else. and
Now,
take it for your own.
part of that,
Can you?
no,
No
So
relative,
about-
like me.
not just that, but, oh, this is under the next thing. Okay, I'm gonna say it anyway, even though she's got it listed under the next thing. We're required to treat animals with respect, basically. So we are, if anyone who has an animal, you are supposed to feed your animal before yourselves. Before you have breakfast in the morning, you're supposed to feed your animals. Interesting, I learned, I'm assuming this is accurate. Anybody who follows that Jewish family on Facebook or Instagram, or I don't know where else they are, is a young family. They're nomads. They travel all around the world, finding out the way Jewish people live everywhere around the world. Really interesting. I actually taught him when he was 6 years old in Sweden, where was born and grew up. But they visited a Jewish farm that had horses, and they didn't own all of the horses. The horses were owned by other people as well, Jewish families, and I guess like a stables kind of thing. And what this family said that had the farm was, not only do they need to feed the animals before they themselves eat, but anyone who owns the horses has to, no, they don't have to come look after it because they know that the farm is going to feed them, but they have to wait to eat breakfast until their animals are fed. So he asked them, yeah, he said, so what, you get a phone call every morning, have you? He said, no, generally we feed them at this time in the morning, and we've told them they're fed by this time in the morning, and you can eat after whatever time it is.
They have a
but-
rota, do they? Have a rota, people come.
No idea, I didn't know that aspect.
The man owns
No, the
estate,
farmer,
feeds them.
Feeds them,
And
they
then
tell the other people.
Okay, no, but 6
Yeah.
o'clock, fed, the horses are fed, you can eat that.
But I knew that you had to feed your animals before you ate, but I didn't realize that even if they're not on your premises, they had to
And this is even
feed.
on coast for animals to eat. You still have to.
Yes, because it doesn't, now this is not even, this is beyond that, it's respecting animals, so. We're not supposed to show cruelty to animals, which is the idea of not eating, no, this one, the last one.
Animals that
A
are-
limb from a living animal. We're not supposed to hurt animals for sport, that would include hunting. Part of that is you're not supposed to harness two different types of animals together to pull a wagon or a plow. Because they go at different paces, they're different heights, they're different.
Something else, is that they go at different paces.
Not supposed to harness two different types of animals to a plow or a wagon to pull it at the same
Like
time.
a donkey and a horse.
A donkey and a horse
Or
or,
it's an oxen or something else.
Oxen and ass, I
An
think.
oxen and ass maybe.
because they have different speeds, different strengths, different heights, weights, whatever, so they go at different things, so it's not fair on them, it's not comfortable for them. Not supposed to muzzle an ox while threshing or eat the flesh of an animal while it's still alive.
But you can have milk. Interesting.
But having milk doesn't harm the animal.
There are many people who would disagree with you
We
because in
don't-
order to have the milk, they take the babies away and they keep milking them so they'll keep producing milk. I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but.
Okay, so the way the cows are treated nowadays might be a different discussion, yes, but the theory of
Right.
milking a cow is not, it doesn't harm the animal.
That boundary was not coming. We won't have that.
Okay.
I was
I
going
would
to
be
say, surely,
language, we're very, very concerned about the care of animals. And she said that they take the babies away from their mums early. And they put them out to grass before they need to be weaned. And they keep milking the cows. I mean, cows are only in milk for a certain period of time, not for the baby that are weaned. They don't need to produce milk anymore, but in order that you and I can have the milk, they keep milking them. And that's why they can still dry up. Well, certainly there are certain times of the year when it can dry up, but anyway, the moon is very, very concerned about that.
I believe so. I think pigeon is. Hold
Yeah, I
on.
want a picture of a wedding, it was a very crucial wedding,
Um,
great synagogue. And I've got the.
yeah, she's got it listed here on the teacher's notes. Chickens, ducks, geese, turkey, and pigeons. Although it doesn't, it's,
Go down Leicester Square.
yeah, it's not very appetizing to me because like they're just all over. They just seem like.
Yeah, they're vermin. They come to this vermin.
Hillary, did you want to say something?
no, sorry.
My garden, there are very straight.
Shall we carry on?
Have we got to?
Should we-
Stephanie,
Stephanie, would you like to read?
Kosher slaughter, you may eat from your cattle or sheep which God has given to you, provided that you first slaughter them as I have commanded you.
So we need to shecht an animal before we eat it. And there have been times in recent history, very, very recent history, I remember getting a whole bunch of complaints when we were in Cardiff one time and we contacted Schritte UK for help to dispute it. But when kosher slaughter was considered inhumane and they tried to have it banned in the UK, but Huh? They're always trying. But the way we believe that the way the animal is killed, the shchita system, if you will, is the most humane way for an animal to die because it's killed instantly, both veins or tubes or whatever it is, checked it at the same time. And not only that, but the knife has to be so sharp that the animal won't even feel it. So much so that in between every single animal, the shochet will check his knife. I don't know if it's sharpened in between each one, but he checks his knife. Evidently, I was just gonna say, not on their fingers, they check it on their thumbnail. So evidently a shochet will have a long thumbnail and it's got lots of nicks in it. But it's really funny because not funny. It's not funny. One time when I was in Denmark in overnight camp, and they had just dipped a whole bunch of cutlery in the mikvah, and they asked me, I was a schlepper. I was doing all the odd jobs. I didn't have an actual job. So they said, oh, do you mind just unpacking the cutlery so we can put it away before dinner? You know, it just came or whatever. Sure, yeah, no problem. I stick my hand in and I thought it was just regular forks, knives, spoons, and I pull it out and I see a cut. I still have a scar right here. I see a cut. Didn't feel a thing. The Rebbitzin goes, oh, you could use it for a shechita knife.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. That was not the answer I wanted. But I didn't feel a thing. And it wasn't until then that I knew that a shechita knife had to be so sharp that you couldn't feel it. But she knew that because her father was a shochet.
I can't understand within these groups that want to ban hashras, you know, ritual sausage and everything. How you can say that bashing an animal over its head,
It's stunning.
it's stunning, then animal over its head is whole. How you can say that that is more humane than what we do, I just don't understand.
Well, they start banning with electrics last.
Well, you know, let's be honest, if a flood came up to you in the street and whacked you over the head and tortured you, which is what you're doing, which is what they're doing, wouldn't that be worse than being one swift knife across your throat? I mean, I'm not advocating that we should go out in the street and get someone to do that to us. But what I'm saying is, but surely, you know, being bashed over their head, which is what in essence is what they're doing. Isn't that what?
No, that's not how they. Like a dart, come from a distance.
Well,
Or. Yes, apparently you're right. Well, you're not awake.
It's like when you have anesthetic and you're at pain work.
Yes. But, well, I don't know, because I'm not the animal.
No,
It's done.
but I'm just in.
Look, to be honest, that's what it boils down to. We can't go because we haven't gone through it.
Well, I can teach
I
it out.
think what they think about the stunning, why they think it should be stung first, is they think that actually killing an animal that knows is conscious when you kill it is worse than killing it after you've knocked it on the head and stunned it. And so they think that even if the action of hitting them over the head or stunning them or in whatever way is less of a problem than cutting their throat, but in some ways it may cause them more pain than the cutting of the throat. But they don't think about that. They just think in terms of the animal is still alive and conscious, and then you go and cut its throat.
So interestingly, things that I've heard, but I don't have a factual basis for this, but things that I've heard, when they stun the animals, they don't always get it right because the animal is scared and moving. They have a fight or flight kind of response. So they're actually more heightened awareness and fear. Whereas when they shecht, they actually keep the animals very calm and relaxed, and they're not in that state of.
They insisted that the animals are putting that pen turns them upside down.
Yes, that's what I was going to do. Is that true?
So I don't.
Are they upside down?
I saw that film.
Because that's what
years
that's what a lot of
They still do that.
people say, that they're upside down.
Yes.
I don't know. I personally don't watch Shkita. It is not something I fancy doing. I don't know. I don't know. Okay, so Shkita is the way that we kill animals. We use a very sharp knife. There's a specific way to do it. An animal that dies or is killed by any other way is not kosher for eating. Who knows what else we can use an animal that was killed like that for?
The skin of the,
We learned it here with Rabbi Simon.
Oh, scrolls.
Torah
Oh,
scrolls.
yeah.
You can use the skin for the parchment for Torah scrolls or mezuzah scrolls or whatever, which I feel very
shoes
interesting.
for that matter.
Yeah, yes. So it's strictly forbidden to eat the flesh removed from an animal while it's still alive, as we just said. So what the glut, checking that the insides are smooth. So after they shech the animal, they check the internal organs, bits. They actually do lots of different kinds of checks. I don't know all of them. I don't care to know all of them. Not my department completely, and that's fine with me. But one of the things people are most aware of is glut. Glut literally means smooth, and they check the lungs to make sure that there's no lesions, no holes in the stomach. No, they check a bunch of things. Why? Because if it had any of those things, any signs that it was ill and about to die, then it would be an automatic treifa, which is not kosher, right? So what we call treif actually isn't usually treif. An animal that was ill, would have died imminently, is a treifa. So they then,
They check them. I mean, they would know if it was ill, I suppose, before.
if it was sick, they'd know beforehand, but they don't
check
always.
By doing a scan rather than having to cut it up, do an autopsy.
I don't know.
It's a bit like an autopsy, isn't it?
Yeah,
Without checking.
I guess so. Well, they have to cut it anyway.
Yeah, see the bottom, the back
Yeah.
side.
Yes.
Get rid of it.
But we don't-
So when they get to that point in time, from what I understand, all the kosher shlachtos, the slaughterhouses, have basically arrangements with non-kosher slaughterhouses. So they not take, because that would, your meat prices would go sky high more than they are now. They sell off any meat that we don't use. So either the back parts, and the reason for that is because there's certain, hold on, veins. There's certain veins that we can't have, so evidently they're easy to remove from the front, but not from the back, and that's why.
Can be,
And-
we used to call the animal those, then as we became more wealthy and could afford to get rid of the back half, it fell out of favor.
So, but now they sell it.
But it is,
I don't
there is
know.
talk to bring it back, because a lot of the same people who want to ban cashews in the first place, totally, also think, oh, well, if we sell it to the goyim, then it's got to be labelled as slaughtered by the kosher process.
So you say that, but they can sell it as halal meat. So if, because as long as they're, and I learned this from a Muslim person way back in the day when we had a Friday night dinner for our interfaith thing. They shecht very much the same. They are happy with kosher meat because we also shecht. The difference is we are much more strict. We're much more strict about who does it. That has to be a trained person, not just any Joe Schmo. We're much more, no, I'm serious. We're much more, huh? Yeah, We're much more strict about,
The health.
sorry, draining the blood, not much more strict. They don't drain the blood at all. So that is something that we do. Evidently not.
I didn't
Yeah.
think it was, you know, sort of that they would eat a bloody animal, but I thought they drained it just basically to get.
I think they drain it as a basic initial, but not not where we should, no. So basically, I think nowadays, because there's a lot more need there's a lot larger Muslim community, so there's a lot more need for meat. It's much more common to set it off, and that also stops the need, if you will, for putting that it's been slaughtered. Because they also want their meat slaughtered. If it's being sold as halal, they would assume that it's slaughtered.
Yeah,
The same way we would assume that kosher meat is shafted.
well, that's why they do it together with the Muslim council and trying to.
There is nothing against us eating the lungs and the kishka, which one usually stuffed in the stomach.
I don't believe so. I mean, it doesn't sound appetizing. So
Lung.
What was that really?
Spleen,
My mum-
spleen that you have as well. I mean, I know that my parents. Yeah.
Yeah, put it through, of
Cheap
course,
food.
very cheap. Milk.
Milk.
Yeah.
Which I think I might be.
the
What's nothing?
Used to make it. And I looked at it, what she was doing. I didn't realise.
Calves foot jelly.
It was actually cast for
It's
you.
very popular.
Oh, my husband likes
So I think a lot of these, yeah, it's probably down to the fact that we're wealthier. You don't have to use every piece of the animal like we used to have an animal. You know, they couldn't afford more so easily and readily. They didn't have butcher shops. You could just go pick which piece of meat you want. So they shafted an animal and they used every single piece.
in your garden?
The chefs today, that is their mantra, isn't it? You think that, the non-kosher chefs, they head to toe, yeah, it's top to bottom and all that.
So the most complicated part to eat is the liver because it contains the most blood. So
Why you burn it rather than salt it. Well,
yeah,
you salt it
that's
and
why you would broil it and whatever. I remember watching how they do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's very nice to eat recently, it's been kosher.
You ever watch these American cookery programs? And they say a little bit of kosher salt.
What is kosher?
It's obviously.
It's called.
It's kosher salt.
Like granular.
It's a coarse salt,
Yeah,
but it's actually
It's a thicker salt.
Yeah.
I think it's what we used to kosher the meat with, but they.
But it just
a lot
makes
of
me
us-
laugh every time I see it on an American show.
It's not only American,
It's not
it's
American,
it's
it's
like kosher salt.
huge, yeah.
but they call it kosher salt.
No, it's
yeah,
not.
where it should be called kosher.
But that's what I'm saying.
So you should comment one time and say all salt is kosher.
Tell me that they don't need it because it's on the TV.
It's very possible.
The point is, if you use ordinary salt, the same amount of ordinary salt, where it says, say for example, a teaspoon of kosher salt, a teaspoon of ordinary salt will make it
Too
much
salty.
more salty.
Yeah.
Because it's closer together, it's finer, and so you get more actual salt.
You need a different
in your
salt,
teaspoon.
yeah.
That's why you have to be careful before you get it. Yeah. No, it's kosher.
I don't measure salt anyway.
Salt, as I said.
Shall we continue?
Prohibition against eating blood. You shall not eat any forbidden fat or blood.
Which is why when we have meat, as you mentioned, we soak and salt and
Yeah, I was getting.
however you do it, soak and salt and soak.
Never
So
done it.
I've never done it. I've never seen the process. I'm perfectly fine not knowing how to do it. I know the concept. That's enough for me. I think if I learned too much about it, I would probably be a vegetarian.
No,
Oh, yeah.
as long as you got a board with children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
That's right.
Trust me, I think if I saw it, I would probably become a vegetarian.
Yes, but it's no more muscular than anything else that you.
Yeah, I just don't think about it. I don't cut meat. I don't guess. 3.
No, but you're very young. We used to kosher food when we were kids. And
Did you?
I remember, and my husband remembers his parents going to buy the chicken hanging up in the lane. But very lucky, it's much easier.
Yes.
The smell of it.
When I was converting, I had to go for interviews at the Beth Inn, and they questioned you on how to kosher things. I said, well, I'm not ever going to do it. I'll just buy my meat ready kosher, because it just started to come in, buying it already kosher from the shop. I said, I'll buy it ready kosher, but I had to tell them I knew how to do it. The funny thing was that I said, what about liver? I said, no problem, I'll never buy liver. I don't like liver. And they said, well, what about it?
Chopped liver.
So what I do remember is when I was in Sweden, they once had a young bacher who was a shochet come do kaparis, with the chicken, and they shechted the chicken. I remember when I was walking over that morning, I heard constantly, but it wasn't a full cock-a-doodle-doo because they were being shechted. And after Yom Kippur, they also did a bunch of turkeys because it's hard for them to get meat in Sweden, and you're not allowed to shecht meat in Sweden for commercial sale, only for private use. So they did for them, and there were 2 rabbis at the time. Now there's a bunch more, but there were 2 rabbis, so they did for the 2 rabbis. And they went and they shechted these turkeys the day after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur night, not the Erev, the night, the Rebbetzin had a baby. So I was teaching in school, but I was also there. It must have been, could Yom Kippur have been on a Wednesday? Does that make sense? Yeah. Thursday they shechted the chickens, and then I was making Shabbos because she had just had a baby, and I had to make chicken soup with freshly shechted, still warm turkey pieces. Turkey. I could have the turkey soup. I could manage that, but the other Rebbetzin, when we went to them for, it must have been Friday night dinner, she served for the first time this lady shechted turkey, and she said, "Say hello to Fred." I did not eat the meat that we had for the next month because I could not bring myself to bring a turkey with a name. Not only that, but at the dinner table, all the boys who helped the sheikhet do all the cleaning and the plucking and whatever were telling all the stories. Oh, do you remember that one that was running around with that? And you remember this? Oh my goodness.
My
So
had George, my grandparents, maybe during the war when they were evacuated, they had a chicken called George.
Chicken George from Root.
Does it lay eggs, George?
But my parents,
My mum used to buy the chicken, she always, and I used to go with her, and she used to pluck it and then bring it back. But she always used to give it a name. And so, I could never eat it, I used to start crying every Friday night.
blame you. It's harder to eat something with a name.
I did zoology, and we had a duck, a mallard, and we had to dissect this, and I couldn't eat chicken for a long time after I dealt with this duck.
Okay,
Well,
shall we?
I know it was not kosher, but it was when I was a child, and we had a rabbit in the garden. I was told not to make a pet of it, but of course I did. I was only small. I was about 7, I think. And I was suspicious one Saturday. And when I went to bed, I heard the that door open, so I looked out of my bedroom window. And then my father went down to the rabbit hutch and got Betsy Bunny out and.
Oh.
I didn't eat dinner.
No.
On Sunday lunch, I didn't have Sunday lunch.
Shall we carry on? Just conscious there's lots more.
Worms, insects and creeping animals. Any creeping creature that creeps on the ground is an abomination. It shall not be eaten. And this is unclean for you among creeping creatures that creep on the ground. The weasel, the mouse, and the toad after its species, the hedgehog, the chameleon, the lizard, the snail, and the mole.
There you go, any creepy crawlies, which is why we check fruits and vegetables. Now, some fruits and vegetables we check, some we don't. The reason for that is because there's a concept of a chazaka. If you have something which literally means chazak is like strong, strengthen, it's a tradition, if you will. So if it's something that you have, 100 cucumbers and all of them are 99, I don't know what the actual percentage is, cucumbers don't have infestation, then don't have bugs in them, then we can assume that cucumbers don't have bugs in them. Apples, yes, we always talk about the worm in the apple, but generally worms don't have apples in them, right? Potatoes, carrots, leafy things where bugs are more likely to get into, broccoli, cauliflower, things like that.
Celery.
Are more likely to have bugs, and that's what determines which fruits and vegetables we need to check. It's if there's generally we would find bugs in such a thing, which sometimes changes according to the season. It could change according to the year. This year all the strawberries have bugs, avoid them. This year, they tend to be fine, so don't worry. Sometimes it changes according to the season, where it's from, the region. If you get from, someone who I know was in Israel, I think she was there for seminary, came back home to Cardiff, and she was opening, I think it was a clementine for one of my kids. And she said, "Oh, I've got to wash my hands and have to wash it first." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, it's got bugs on it." No, well, in Israel, but evidently in Israel, the clementines are covered in bugs on the outside. So you have to wash the outside so that they're not on your hands. And then you have them on you. Okay.
You would peel an orange in public in Israel, people will shout at you. My granddaughter had a clementine or an orange, and she was peeling it in it where she works, or out in the open. And they were absolutely horrified. That is not what you do.
So where are you supposed to peel it?
You peel it inside it, and then you might eat it. But you don't do, not a fruit to be eaten.
Interesting.
What, just another, she got shouted at, she must have been out in public and she wanted to have an orange, I don't know, I mean, she's a plentiful, you can pick them up off the ground, I pick up lemons when I'm there. I'm on the ground, I don't know, that must say quite happily, sort of peel them to juice them.
Don't know. Learn something new every day. So that's how we that's why we check fruits and vegetables, and how we decide, if you will, which fruits and vegetables need checking. It's not, there is a rhyme and reason to it, basically. It's not just random.
Down to flying insects.
Yeah.
Was it flying insects? Any flying insect that walks on the floor is an abomination for you.
These all sound very good to me.
Four legs.
Four legs.
Huh?
3 legs.
It's not talk about
Fly?
about flies. Six-legged or eight-legged.
No, it doesn't make you think.
Five legs and stuff.
They don't fly.
Well, you can't, so don't worry, you're safe. Would you like to read the last one?
Yes, pressuring, pressurizing and toiling. immersing vessels. The gold, the silver, the copper, the iron, the tin and the lead, you shall pass through the fire and be cleansed with the sprinkling waters of the mikveh.
There's nothing about stainless steel.
Or aluminium.
No, probably not. So the kosherizing or tabling. So we table dishes in a mikvah before we use them. And koshering is a process of if you have an item, a dish or utensil or anything that for some reason is not kosher, whether it's been mixed up in your own kitchen or you got it from somewhere else, it wasn't from a kosher kitchen, and you can kosher them. Not all materials are kosherable that you can kosher them. And we generally kosher items in the way that they are used. So
They're heated as opposed to.
right, if they're heated, usually it's items that are heated. If you,
So earthenware, you can't even though you heat it.
I would have to ask, because I get really confused with this. But, and some people say you can kosher plastic and some say you can't. The idea of koshering is generally vessels is the word that it uses here, utensils, crockery, whatever it is, absorbs the flavor of the food that it has on it. If it's hot or if it's spicy, or if it's, I think some of this comes up different later, if it's hot or if it's spicy or if it's cut with a sharp knife, then that will draw out the flavors of the things in the utensil or the pot or the bowl. So we need to make sure that it's kosher utensils or meat on meat crockery utensils, milk on milk crockery or utensils. And we would kosher it this same or similar way that we would use it. So a pot, you would cook something in, you would boil something up. So you boil it with water, boil it over to kosher a pot, that kind of idea. So that's the koshering process.
But
That makes sense.
tabling is different, isn't it?
Sorry, tabling is dipping it in a mikvah. Yes.
Well, some people have the idea that we need to put table everything, whereas in Torah, Hashem only says anything that you stolen from the Amalekite or taken from the Amalekite. Not the Egyptians when they left Israel.
So we take that as, I don't know why, but we do any dishes that were made by a non-Jewish person. I don't know why, I don't know the reason for it, I don't. That's one of the things I would say, I do not understand. I don't get it, I don't understand it. But that's what we're told to do.
I thought something, you know, brand new, fancy word.
I haven't got a clue, I do not understand, but that's what we're told, that's what we do.
I think it's not something you have to do, it's something, I don't think it's you have to do it to have a kosher. This is what I was told, but you have, yeah, but someone told me that it's not a requirement, it's a tradition, but I don't know.
As far as I know, you should do it.
Right.
So,
No, I
yes,
have done.
no, but as far as I know, it's something that should happen. Some people say you don't have to with plastic. I don't know why, maybe because it's considered non-permanent.
Any beauty from the American.
I will hold you to that. So let me ask you, do you know who is an Amalekite? Have they?
There was the people,
Mm.
there was some wicked people, but.
Are you sure?
The actual kind of Amalekite.
Yeah. No, don't know.
That is.
There's
Now
different
just used
opinions.
as a general name for people.
Like me to continue text 4.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Kosher
Thanks,
slaughter.
Sharon.
Kosher animals and birds are slaughtered by a special procedure called shkita. An extremely sharp knife without any nicks is used to precisely and painlessly cut the animal's throat. Both the carotid and vertebral arteries are immediately severed, causing immediate death, in contrast to stunning, where the animal may be paralyzed but can still feel pain. The animal's internal organs are examined for potentially fatal disease or injuries which can render the entire animal trait non-kosher. Only certain parts of the kosher animal are permitted to be consumed. The entire hind part is sold to non-kosher butchers. Within 72 hours of slaughter, all extractable blood is drained from the meat by a special soaking and sorting process, as consuming blood is forbidden according to the Torah.
Do we need to go through that again? We did it, right? Okay, would you like to carry
Milk,
on?
eggs, and honey. The rule of thumb is what comes from a kosher animal is kosher. What comes from a non-kosher animal is not kosher. Eggs need to be checked for blood spots before eating, and honey is not considered an animal product and is therefore kosher, even though bees are not. Never
So-
quite understand that because they're processed.
But
Honey
then
is
eggs
processed.
can be milk, can't they, and then come from meat,
Yeah.
so.
Well,
So-
I think it's come from meat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
milk comes from meat and yet
Right.
it's considered dairy.
Yeah.
Eggs
Are pareve.
are pareve.
Honey.
Honey is pareve. It's not considered, it's not something that comes from the bee.
Directly.
They've,
It's
no, because you don't have to
They
kill a
process
cow to
the
get the milk. As a matter of fact, if you killed,
That's what I'm saying, you know, you don't have to kill the cow, you don't have to kill the pig, you don't have to kill. what's
No,
the
but,
other one?
eggs.
Chicken, they get
The
eggs.
difference is the eggs and the milk need to be from a kosher animal. Bees are not kosher. So what's the difference? Honey doesn't come from the bee. The bees make the honey for us. They process
the
it.
nectar.
They don't, it doesn't come from them. Interestingly, if you would shecht a cow that has milk in it, the milk is meaty.
Yeah, yeah.
So we can have it on Tuesdays.
So, no,
On Tuesday, we have meaty meals here and we have oat milk.
so the milk is considered meaty. No, the sheikhtim get rid of the milk because it is way too, it doesn't look any different. It is way too confusing. So there, in reality, no meaty milk
I
exists.
thought you couldn't have it in the first place.
And
You-
No, it was considered meaty, I just thought you couldn't have it.
So
But
you
it's
can't
appropriate.
have it because it's too confusing, not because I don't think it's considered treif, it's considered meaty because once the animal is shechted, it's considered a part of the animal.
It's pregnant. And you still eat.
Oh,
the
they
animal.
Yes,
Oh,
That's awful.
yes.
And
That's
the
unright.
eggs that are inside a chicken have not, that haven't
Yeah, meaty.
been
Also
laid, that's,
meaty.
they're considered meaty as well, aren't they?
Correct.
When
Yeah,
they-
but you put them in the soup anyway. You can't get them anymore. Wish you
You can.
There's an article in the JC that he managed to get some.
Oh,
The Boucherie had some, was it last week or the week before?
Yeah.
Well, I was at the counter, when I was at the checkout, a woman, one of the staff from the back came up with and offered it to me.
No, they were wrapped.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on.
so talking about eggs, Sally mentioned before about white eggs and brown eggs. The reason people often get white eggs is because we're not allowed to have blood in eggs. The same way we're not allowed to have blood in anything else.
In the yolk, because it would have been fertilized.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's a
Yes.
fertilised egg.
Whereas
That
if
would be
there's
the blood.
sometimes Something in the white.
Brown spots, that's
Yeah.
not considered blood.
That's fine.
So the
It's a
the
fertilised
reason white eggs is because all eggs go through some sort of,
egg.
yes, thank you.
See-through.
The brown eggs are, I was gonna say lighting, but I knew that wasn't the wrong word, that was the wrong word. The brown eggs, the shells are thicker and they're spotty. So and they're darker, so it's harder to see in that process if there are actual blood spots. So when you get white eggs, they're thinner, they're lighter, they don't have as many spots. It's much easier to C. So it's much more likely that all of your eggs will, or most of your eggs will be kosher, as opposed to the brown eggs, it's not necessarily the fact.
But battery hens never see a cock anyway, so
How are their blood
how are they
spots?
going
They
to
haven't
be
got it.
fertilized? They can't be fertilized if
haven't
they
got
haven't
a
got a
clue.
cock around.
When the chickens stop laying eggs, female chickens, the hens, what happens to the hens? Because when they say that there's a shortage of fowls, I don't
know.
understand. There must be something that happens to hens when they
Now
stop
I'm
laying.
asking manufacturing questions. That's not a kashrus question.
Ask
I
them.
don't know.
Okay, but you might have known the answer.
Well,
So-
hens had more expensive chickens now, it used to be cheap.
What?
Hens used to be cheap for chickens, now they're more expensive than chickens.
Now it's more expensive.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, shall we carry on?
Milk and meat, separating milk and meat. Milk and meat must never be cooked or eaten together. Separate utensils are used for each, and a waiting period is observed between eating them. Why? Foods that
So-
neither meat nor dairy are called thorough. These include eggs, fruit, vegetables, and grains. Thorough foods, with the exception of fish, can be mixed and eaten with either meat or dairy.
She did have.
Separate dishes.
Hold on.
Fish you can eat at the same meal.
Did I not?
Yes,
Yes,
but
no.
not
Meat, but not on the same plate.
She did have somewhere. So is this it? So we don't use the same dishes, we have separate dishes and utensils, because as I said, with the koshering process, because the
Transferring the
dishes will
flavors.
transferring of the flavors, and the waiting, there was a, come on, I've lost it now.
Something to do with digestion.
So interesting, it said that one of the reasons the rabbis gave in times of the Talmud was that meat can get stuck in your teeth, so there was a blanket rule. Now, interestingly, if you've ever seen these charts that they say how long it takes for food to be processed in your system, it's around the same amount of time that we wait. The reason some people wait an hour from dairy to meat is
They were Dutch.
no, that's from
The
meat
other
to
way
dairy.
Meat to dairy.
Well, that's interesting. Yes.
Meat to dairy. If they're Dutch, they only wait an hour. The most common here is 3 hours. But from dairy to meat, we wait an hour. Some people only wait half an hour. Evidently because the reason was in the Talmud, whoever it was, and it is here somewhere. I thought I marked everything up so I'd be able to find it. Was that they said that you shouldn't have meat and dairy within the same hour. And some people took it to mean literally that you should wait an hour, not have it within the hour. And some people took it as basically not to have it right away in the same meal. So they don't wait as long, it doesn't get stuck in your teeth in the same way, it doesn't stay in your system the same way.
Is it, if you have hard cheese, you're supposed to wait longer?
Yes, hard cheese, they say you're supposed to wait 6 hours.
Yes.
Yeah, if you ask,
Do you mean if you have some cheese and then 12 o'clock, and you're going to have your lunch at 1 o'clock? You have to wait 6 hours.
hard cheese. So hard cheese is a cheese that is matured for more than 6 months.
Cheddar.
Not Chevington.
So if you ask Barry Lent, the owner of Chevington Cheese, according to him, the only cheese that he makes that you need to wait 6 hours is mature cheddar.
Yeah.
But his mature cheddar doesn't taste mature.
No,
I don't know.
Unless it's been in the freezer for 3 months.
we like
Imagine
a
it.
strong cheddar.
Don't always taste like cheese.
Uh-huh. So mature cheddar is, he said, you do need to wait 6 hours, otherwise Parmesan would be considered a cheese you need to wait 6 hours. And
So
because of the way the cheese is made.
when you said 6 hours, so like many of us wait 3 hours between meat and milk. So would we use the same principle for that?
I don't know.
We wait, say 3 hours.
That's a good question.
When you have a snack at 11 o'clock.
No, I'm just saying.
Cheese,
Like,
would you have to wait 6 hours
I'm just
before
saying,
you can have your lunch?
that's what I'm asking.
That's
Like,
what I'm asking.
no, I'm not.
Oh.
Like, we have we will have milk 3 hours after meat, like I think we just, right? So because of that, would it be the other way around if we had hard cheese?
I will find
would
out.
we wait 3 hours rather than
No, it's
6?
I will find out.
No, but it depends, if you're
I'll
not going
ask.
to have, you mean if you're going to have a meaty meal,
Yeah, after.
that's what I'm saying. So
After
what I'm
having
saying,
hard
if
cheese.
biscuits at 11 before 11 is, you've got to wait 6 hours before you would have. your
Right, so
meaty
what
lunch.
Pam is saying is we wait 6 hours from meat to dairy,
Yes,
right?
now do you have to wait
You
6
wait
hours?
3 hours for meat to dairy. So do you have to wait 6 hours from milk to meat if you eat the hard cheese, or just the 3 hours? Because that's equivalent. I will find out.
And my parents only ever used to wait an hour, they were not Dutch.
Are you sure?
I know that they weren't Dutch, they were totally Russian. My son-in-law waits an hour because he was Dutch. His wife has taken that on. So how do you decide whether you're a 1 hour, 3 hour, or 6 hour?
6 hour person.
I think it's tradition.
Yeah.
Well, I say.
It's the one
tradition,
hour
but
between
my
milk
nieces
and meat,
and nephews
from meat to
wait.
Yeah,
meat
that's
to
an hour.
Yeah.
So- I would say tradition, but I would say it also depends on what customs you've taken on. So for example, my parents are Balei Shiva, they became from. My in-laws are traditional, so they wait 3 hours, but we are Chabad. So the Chabad custom is to wait 6 hours. So we've taken that on at some point. So
My granddaughter, she waits 3 hours if she's had chicken, but 6 hours if she has meat. So when she came over,
interesting.
if I was going to give her meat, I had to do it Friday night. So they went to bed and they were all right for the price.
It's all right for breakfast.
So interestingly,
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
What you want.
I think
I grew up with 1 hour, and for some reason or other, we do.
you might have to, so you might be able to, interesting, if people have taken on a custom for themselves, right? And they find years down the line that either it's too hard for them, it's not something they're ready to do, whatever it is. And they ask their rabbi, this happens often with girls and boys who go to yeshiva or sem or whatever, and they get all fired up from learning and then they go out in life and actually it's too much for them. They're not ready for that. They ask their rabbis what to do. And usually they say before, is it Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur when we do a Teres Nadarim? The men do it. See, we don't even know what it is. Haven't got a clue what's flying. Anyway, they all in the minyan before either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. I have no idea. I totally don't pay attention. It should be 10 men, but you can do it with 3. Well, it would have to be 4 because it's 3 sit as like a base din. And there's a specific thing that they say to nullify all of the vows that they made. So you would go, no, but it's a specific thing. So you would go before this base din and you would ask for that to be, yeah.
Nullified.
I don't know exactly how it works. Haven't got a clue. Never done it myself. But
Ask your husband.
that's very possible, especially if you grew up one way and your husband doesn't have a particular custom that he followed and it sort of just developed over the years, then that's definitely a possibility. Something to look into. I don't know exactly the details, but it's worth asking.
Why they're only an hour? Why is it only an hour? Where that came from?
But isn't an hour the same more than 3 hours? 3 hours wasn't in the Torah, was there?
Well, there's not in the.
There's no
times. It used to be 2 hours. I only ever heard of 1 3 and that's it.
So I only heard of 6 growing up, and then I moved to England, well, Wales to be exact, so.
3 hours.
3 hours.
3 hours, and then I met Josh Liss's Kala, who keeps one, because they're, so I was like, what? Yeah,
Ah,
it was like, what?
soon.
3 was short enough for me, like, what are you talking about, 1? So,
Separating milk and meat. Milk and meat are separately cooked or eaten together, separate utensils to use. For each
We did that.
variety, separate dishes.
you didn't do the separate part of it, did you do the separate part, this foods that are neither meat or dairy or para?
Yes, yeah, I did that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's more basic that non-kosher substance can render an otherwise kosher food not kosher. In addition, heat aids the absorption of flavour into the walls of the cooking containing vessel and will subsequently impart that flavour into other foods. Therefore, separate utensils are used for milk and for meat. Does that apply to glass?
No, because
It doesn't mention glass.
Yes, for cooking, yes. If you're cooking in a glass, then yes. Pyrex is not considered pure glass. Definitely you cannot kosher Pyrex. No.
You can, what about the glass? So we went, the flat that we were in recently, she had a very big glass system. And it had metal handles and it had a lid with a metal handle on the top. And I was very wary of using it because I thought maybe it would crack. So I didn't use it. But that.
So
that would be part of
the
just
reason,
glass
no, the reason that glass is assumed okay is because generally it's not used for very hot things. It's used for cold because it will crack if you use it for very hot. So the things that we say that make an item absorb the flavors is heat, spicy things, or sharp things, whether that's sharp foods, flavors, or a knife, because you press hard on a knife as opposed to a spoon. You don't have to push it. Usually it's being used on a food that you don't have to put as much force into it.
Right, stewed apples.
Yeah, so hold on. So glass is generally not used with hot foods. So why can you go to, I don't know, the pub and have a cold drink? Because it's used for cold drinks and the glasses won't absorb the flavors. But you wouldn't have a glass bowl for a soup from an unknown or non-kosher kitchen because it would be hot, it would be absorbing the flavors, and it's probably a treated glass so that it could withstand the heat, which would then not be a kosherable thing like Pyrex. Pyrex is a treated glass, so Pyrex is not
Or
kosherable.
something that is specially treated white china, but you can then, I don't, not Pyrex, but Pyrosil was something that we put on.
It's like white glass, yeah.
I know it's not glass.
No, but I was saying,
Yes,
it's,
I know what
it
you
looks sort of like. a
casserole
milk glass.
dishes,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
The melamine,
Well, no, melamine.
Melamine's plastic. Yeah, don't put that
You
in.
can't-
Sorry.
you can't use that.
it can be.
No.
Okay, produce, fruit, vegetables and grains are always kosher but must be insect-free. Produce grown in Israel has special kosher requirements regarding the tithes, should be therefore purchased only with a reliable kosher certification.
So fruits and vegetables, well, produce bought outside of Israel is very challenging because we don't know if it's supervised produce, if the tithes have been taken and anything like that. If it's bought anywhere else in the country, the tithes and whatever the other things are, the Shemitah is one of them. Tithes is not a requirement outside of Israel, only in Israel. So produce from, if you're in Israel, you can find out if it's okay. If you're out of Israel, it's much more challenging. Interestingly, if we just go back to para foods for a moment, at one point in time, poultry was going to be considered para. It isn't, for some reason, it got too confusing.
I meant to ask you that before.
But it evidently was getting too confusing for people, so it did not stay para.
But did you always have to kosher chicken? Because if it was pork, you wouldn't have kosher.
Well, it still would have had blood, so you would have had to kosher it. That's a different
Fish has blood,
concept.
but not so much.
No idea. I guess that's why. And when we talk,
I think it's not.
No, it's something,
Yes, it's something, it's, yeah. I remember being told this at paper.
yeah.
The vision doesn't actually have.
No, that's why vegetarian,
That's why it's underneath.
yeah, that's why.
In the
vegetarian needs it.
The blood, would mix it and tell me about it all through.
I don't know.
No, I mean, I'm not really a vegetarian, I say they're a vegetarian. It's okay.
Going
Yeah.
Going back to the separate dishes and separate meat and milk, power of things, if you would cook a power of food, eggs, fish, pasta, fruit, veg, anything like that, in a meat utensil, it would be considered meat, or if you cooked it in a milk utensil, it would be considered milk. It does not mean that you need to wait 1, 2, 3, 6 hours, whatever it is that you wait. It means that it's considered meaty or milky. So if you cook pasta in a meaty dish, you then couldn't then take it and toast it with, you can then melt your cheese on it and toast it, unless of course it's a power of cheese, which is whatever. But
do you not have to wait after that? Can you eat like a cheese sandwich if you want?
correct. But not on it, with it,
No,
cooked with it.
Yeah.
But you can eat it right after, you don't have to wait. So
If you cook fish,
Sorry. Go on.
Mhm.
After you cook
fish. In a para container. And everybody else having meat at the table, and you have meat, you have the fish on a meat plate. You are still para when you finish eating.
Yeah.
So right.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Hold on. Two more questions.
So the other thing is, if you. Hold on, let me form the.
Okay. Jackie, did you have a question?
No, it's just, you know, there's been an explosion of plant foods.
Yes.
There's like plant cheese and plants.
It's coconut.
No,
I know what you mean.
Vegan and vegan.
Soy stuff.
And the same of the, social webs, the Facebook version. That you could, although they were considered dairy because they were made on dairy equipment, you didn't have to wait before they eating. And I'm like, right.
Right, so interestingly, the ice creams, for example, made on dairy equipment, we wouldn't have, because we have only cholesterol, so they are considered dairy. Because there is a residue of dairy in it, so there's a minimal amount.
Yeah, they said that.
But it's not considered dairy that you would have to wait after it, because there's an idea of batul bashishim, that it's 1/60th of the amount. So it's not considered dairy. If you have, this is what I learned in school, if you have a drop of milk that falls into a meat, soup, cholent, whatever, it depends how much of the milk fell in. It depends if it was a liquidy soup or a thick cholent. It depends if it fell on the solid part or if it went into the liquid part. It depends how big your soup, cholent, whatever meat was. If it's less than 1/60th, then it's batul, it's nullified compared to the rest of it. So that's where that idea comes from, that it's on dairy equipment.
So you say if you drop the milk, it falls into the pan and the whole thing is not kosher.
So no, if you're cooking
Yeah.
something, so if you're cooking a cheese something casserole in a meat dish,
Yeah.
then it's not, because it would be absorbing the flavors from the dish.
No.
If there's a lot more rules that go into all of that, but if a little drop falls in, then the best answer to any of these things, if you mix up anything or do something in the wrong thing, ask a rabbi. Don't just throw it out, because most often is okay. I don't know how. Every time my husband asks, he says no. The rabbi says it's fine. Are you sure? I remember learning the rules in high school, and we learned them in great detail. And the bottom line of every situation was ask your local rabbi. It's like, finally, one day, I remember so clearly, somebody says, "Rabbi Hertz, if you're teaching this all to us, why do we need to ask the rabbi?" So he gave us two answers. Number one, this was partly an answer to another thing. Number one, you have to learn it so that you know when to ask a question and so that you know what to ask, so that you know the situation. You have to know if it was hot, you have to know if the pot was clean, you have to know when it was last used. All of that will help with the answer. If the pot was clean, if it was not used for the past 24 hours, it has a different standing than if it was used recently, what it was used for, all of these things. If it was cleaned in between, was it cleaned with soap? Was it not cleaned with soap? So you have to know the details to give the rabbi to formulate the answer. Number one. Number two, the other thing he said was, why are the rabbis men and not women? Why do they answer these questions? And it's the women in the kitchen who cook. Why? Because we're a lot more strict. We're a lot harder on ourselves. We're going to turn around and say, and it's funny because I only remembered him saying this after we were married and had a couple of kids and, you know, had been married for, I don't know, 5 years, and something got mixed up. And I said, that's it. It's trade, throw it out. My husband said, wait, let's ask the rabbi. He asked the rabbi and he goes, no, it's fine. And I said, no, he asked somebody who learned it in more detail. And no, and he asked somebody who knew it in more detail. And because I actually learned those particular rules in more detail than he did. So I turn around and go, no, it's trade, throw it out. And he goes, no, ask the rabbi, it's fine. And I remember the first time it happened, I said, I can't put it away. I said, I can't take this milchik bowl from the Fleishik dishwasher and put it back in the milchik cabinet. You sure it's okay? You sure it's okay? And then I remembered Rabbi Hertz saying that the rabbis are, because they know the rules, they can be more lenient with the answers because they understand it and they learn it in greater detail, not that they necessarily understand it. And we are intrinsically more strict and will want to be more strict. So that's why we're the ones in the kitchen. We look after the kashrus and they can help us make the rules and make sure that we don't have to throw out all of our dishes. Okay. Pam had a question. Hold on.
Actually, I was going to say that sometimes we've asked your husband or like pleasure or something, thinking, oh, they're going to say, get rid of it. And it hasn't been that. It's okay. So that was good. Yeah, but the thing is, the other day I had this similar this question there. You know, we had a family staying with us for Mendel's bar mitzvah, and you made a babka, and I really liked the babka, and there was a little bit left, and Rachel said, I can keep it. And I thought, oh, I fancy some on Friday night, but I didn't know if it's milky or not, so I checked with you. I spoke to your husband, you probably have too, and I always get a bit confused, so I always like to check. So I knew that I could eat it after the meaty meal, and I just had it on a plate so that it was not on a meaty plate.
So when I do my baking, 98% of my baking is actually parve.
Yeah.
Every so often, if I follow a recipe and it has something milky in it, I'll do it like that for the first time anyway. Most of my baking is parve. All my baking I do in my milchik oven. Why? Because you're more likely to have a piece of cake with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee than you are with a piece of meat. It's still considered parve, like we were saying before. If I cook it in the milky oven, but all parve ingredients, it's still considered parve. So you can have it directly after a meaty meal. You just couldn't eat it with your chicken or with your meat. Most people are not likely to do that. So I figure I'm safer making it milky, because if I bake meaty, you can definitely have it after a meaty meal, not a problem, but you can't have it with your cup of tea or coffee.
Unless you
Unless you use soya.
So if you cook your food in your milky oven and you use a milky tin, say you use the tin for a cheesecake or something.
Oh, I use all disposable.
Right.
I use all disposables.
But then parve still, it's all parve ingredients.
No, you put a Madeira cake in a tin that has had cheesecake.
If it's
So
clean,
the liner.
If it's
clean,
yeah,
and the
Hasn't
tin
been used
itself
for
hasn't
7
been
days.
used in the last 24 hours.
So does that apply if you only have one oven?
Yeah.
Most of us have only got one oven.
So if you only have, so in Cardiff, sure, they had 2 ovens, but it wasn't one meaty, one milky. No, so they would kasher in between. You can't use one oven for both meat and milk ever, because you have this steam. So it's even a problem with a stove. If you have one stove, technically you should use one side or particular rings, but preferably one side meat and one side milk, depending how high your hood is, because the steam has the same effect as your dishes, as in drying in the thing. So you know all that grime on the top, you probably clean yours, because you're the way you talk about cleaning your oven, I don't even want to see, right? But most people who do not clean their hoods regularly, the top gets very grimy, right? And what is it from? It's from the steam.
Oh, how can people afford to have 2 ovens?
One is normally smaller, isn't it?
So my mother has one oven and
Yeah, my top oven is very simple, you can't really make it.
my mother has one oven and a toaster oven for milking. A small little countertop toaster oven. It's not a full size oven.
If you wrap things properly.
You can double wrap things. That would avoid the steam issue. Not everything can be cooked double wrapped.
Ever had one oven.
No.
Unless they have very deep holes.
So
It's a galley kitchen, like you have upstairs here,
you would kasher,
in between tonight.
or you would, although
You don't
it's
use it
not.
for 3 days?
It's not advisable to kasher on a regular basis,
But
because
if
then
don't
you
use
go,
it, you haven't used it for 24 or 48 hours.
in order to use it for the opposite thing, it would have to be spotlessly cleaned and kashered, which on high heat for 2 hours and not used within 24 hours.
That's microwave.
Microwave oven, I'm not exactly sure. I know we Chabad, not everybody. Some people, it depends which rabbi you ask, hold that you cannot kasher a microwave oven. Some people say that you can. I don't know how to do it. I'm not, it's because we've been told by our Rav that we can't, so I don't know how to do it. I know some people can. Same with dishwashers. Some people say that you can kasher a dishwasher. Again, you wouldn't go back and forth with a dishwasher, but if you did it as a one-off. Some people say you can't because of the plastic parts that are in it. Some people say you can kasher plastic. Some people say that you can't kasher plastic. So
That's right, so you can kosher the dishwasher, you put it on the highest wash, leave it, and then use it for the other.
So as far as I understand, I never asked as far as a dishwasher, but I know oven wise and generally large appliance wise, definitely in a domestic situation, it's inadvisable to regularly switch between the two, because it's very easy to get confused, leave something behind, constantly cleaning, get relaxed about how clean it is. I think for Sally it'd probably be fine, but everybody else, also it can be confusing. Is it meaty at the moment? Is it milky at the moment? Oh, I don't have time to kasher it now. I'm sure it's fine. It's much easier to get it mixed up.
I actually thought the separate glass plate totally for my microwave, so I use one.
I tend to put other things in there when I make eating meals. I think
What goes on the outside walls of it, they actually down the food.
So if anything steams, then it would be food particles. That's what the grime is. I know my kids. So that I don't know. I never looked into it. We have a microwave for barekas and popcorn. And I don't know what else. And my kids managed to burn that. That's interesting.
We're doing this fun.
I need to get a recipe then. Clearly, I need to get a recipe. Yeah, okay. We still have a lot to go. Should we go with, read it? Yes, read it on your, I don't know about testing you, but read it on your own. I think the rest of it is pretty straightforward. If anyone has any questions, please definitely do put it on the group. And I will post, Lydia, if you don't mind passing on to Jackie, I will post the link for the clip for the, I don't even remember what it was now, but he talks for 5 minutes. Something at the beginning, which was fresh in my mind at the time. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've washed up my coffee project late.
Oh, thank you.
All the answers in.